Thank you. Good morning. Thank you for having us. My name is Brian Jones. I'm a Senior Vice President at Utegration. Utegration is a systems integrator that works almost exclusively with utilities, energy, oil, and gas companies. We're fortunate today to have some of the brightest minds in the industry. We've heard a lot all week about all the emerging technologies and all the emerging issues in our industry and how that's going to change and affect fundamentally how we do business. And the interesting thing about this panel, these are the poor chaps that have to make sure all this works. It's not just about keeping the lights on, but it's all the kind of behind the curtain type of stuff to keep everything running and also to always keep ahead of the next big innovation in technology. So with that, we'll do a quick round of introductions. Colt, if you'd like to go first.
Yeah, good morning. Colt Sarver, the VP of Business Technology at Vistra Energy. Vistra is a relatively new name and brand in the market. It's been around for about 6 months. Vistra is the new parent company of TXU Energy and Bluebonnet, competitive retailer and power generation here in the Texas ERCOT market.
I'm Gary Hayes, Senior Vice President and CIO at Centerpoint Energy. And we have competitive electric services. We're the T&D wire services here in Texas, along with LDC across about 6 states. We also have a competitive service in Minnesota that's a home service plus, a home service appliance repair. And lastly, I support a competitive energy wholesale services across about 26 states.
And I'm Brian Helms, Chief Architect with the Lower Colorado River Authority. So we do more than just manage lakes. We have generation and transmission, as well as public safety and managing the parks.
Grant Gutierrez, I'm the CIO at Bluebonnet Electric Cooperative. We are a T&D, and we serve retail consumers in a territory that stretches between Austin and Houston.
Great, thanks. Thanks, gentlemen. You know, it's interesting. We all had dinner last night, and I wish we could have videotaped the dinner. It was one of those dinners that kind of just lingered and lingered. We kind of talked about, believe it or not, all the topics that we could discuss today. It was tough to try to narrow it down to a small group of topics. But you know, it's interesting. In June of this year, I will mark my 30th anniversary, 30-year anniversary of being in this industry. And you know, 30 years ago, I started working for an electric and gas utility. And fundamentally, things are still the same today. Electric and gas water utilities still provide clean, safe, reliable energy or water to their consumers. But what is changing is how that is being done. And if you think about it, just what has been accomplished in our lifetimes, the National Academy of Engineering states that the single biggest engineering achievement in the history of man is not the cell phone, it's not the internet, it's not even spacecraft that go to the moon or satellites in orbit. The single biggest engineering feat in our history as a species is the electric grid. And they list the water supply and distribution network as the 4th biggest achievement of mankind. So think about the fundamental nature of how the electric grid and the water supply has changed literally our civilization. It's revolutionized what we're able to do. And the fundamental thing that we're seeing now in 2017 is all of that is being disrupted like never before. With all the rapid pace of technology and all the new innovations around various different industries, and especially in operational technologies, information technologies, our industry will transform itself yet again to levels we've never dreamed of. It kind of reminds me, I have to, as I was listening to all these just brilliant minds last night at dinner, I was just kind of observing and learning from all these very intelligent people. And me being the very visual and simple-minded person that I am, I couldn't help but think of an analogy of being in a boat many years ago. I was in a little small fishing boat in a bay that was a port city. And I noticed off in the distance, there was this massive cruise ship. And I thought, wow, that's a really big boat, but it doesn't seem to be moving very fast. And as time went by, a few more minutes went by. I thought, wow, that boat is really big, a lot bigger than I thought. And it's moving a little faster than I thought. And then when the thing kind of got really close, that boat wasn't big, that boat was ginormous. It was massive, and it wasn't moving slow, it was moving so fast that if I didn't hurry up and row as fast as I could, I was gonna be run over by this massive ship. And I think that's kind of where we are in our industry today. We see this change, we see this convergence of IT, OT, we see the onslaught of big data, we see new innovations like the cloud, and we know they're out there, we know they're big, we know they're fundamental changes, but how fast are they really coming? Do we need to start rowing right now as fast as we can? Do we have time to kind of observe and make sure see which way the boat's going? Because that boat's so big and moving so fast, if we don't move at the right time, we're going to get run over. So with that kind of backdrop in mind, it'd be interesting to hear the perspective. And by the way, if you didn't notice, we've got a very diverse group here. We've got competitive energy retailers, generation, transmission, distribution, both gas and electric. We got not just the water and the lakes, but we've got generation, transmission, and of course, different business models, electric cooperatives, investor-owned utilities, and quasi-governmental organizations. So with that in mind, I want to kind of kick it off. And actually, Kolt, let's start with you just from an IT-OT perspective. You've got some generation assets in your portfolio. How is that affecting your business?
Yeah, I mean, at conferences like this over the past several years, one of the big topics for technologists is the convergence of IT and OT, right? IT being kind of the traditional data center, business application kind of technologies, OT being the operational technology within the power plants, within the transmission distribution systems. Brian, to your point, we have less of a convergence of that just because our footprint within the generation space is a little bit smaller than, for example, the T&D space. But what we've been able to do over the past couple of years, really just from a human resource perspective, to integrate the kind of some of the OT team members that we've got that used to reside at the power plants. We've brought them into what used to be our traditional IT team, right? So really just the collaboration, the alignment within your HR org structure, but the partnership between the two. And when we talk about it, I don't think any company ever is going to be 100% converged, because I don't think there's a right answer, right? But every company's got to try to figure out what's the right balance to try to be able to leverage those capabilities together.
Great. And Gary, if you haven't seen Gary speak, Gary has presented on this topic multiple events, multiple conferences. And it's always interesting to hear your perspective, because Centerpoint has always been kind of on that leading edge over the last few years in terms of bringing new technologies to the market. So yeah, maybe share with this group, Gary, how
we've looked at, well, one of the primary things that I find is that the thing you have to get past is when you talk about IT and OT, it's not about organizations, and that's where most people start. It's about the process that you need to do and the roles that you need to play to support technologies that spread across your organizational footprint. So if you can get past that, the discussions get much simpler. But really, when we think about convergence, we talk about IT, OT, CT, BT. So information, operations, consumers, and business. And when you think business, well, that is what we do. But the convergence of what's happening around cloud and cloud solutions, where technologists are not necessarily needed to do programming, but yet you still have to ensure security, continuity, quality, controls. All of that comes together and now converging into what we refer to as the intelligent energy future.
Interesting. So it's interesting you talk about it's not just deploying, for example, smart meters like you did. It's not just making sure that those meters have communications and connectivity, correct, but it's all the other systems and security wrapped around it. And it seems unfathomable that you're able to manage that complexity. And,
well, it's really we are more and more sophisticated. And as you think about that broader sophistication, that's where the complexity lives. And as was talked about around the design, is how do we get that to simplicity for the user sides of that. The sausage making, that's our job.
So, now Brian, it was interesting at dinner last night. You bring kind of a fresh perspective, right? Because you're, unlike some of us, I don't know what I don't want to use a derogatory term. I'll call myself a dinosaur, I guess. But having been in the industry for 30 years, sometimes it's really nice to hear that fresh perspective and where you kind of challenge, well, geez, I don't understand why you think this way, because I would think you would want to do it this way. So it was really enlightening to hear you speak at dinner last night. So from an IT-OT convergence, I mean, you deal with a lot of different things at LCRA around not just managing water, but also transmission and generation. How is this affecting the business, and how do you as a chief architect figure out how all these things work together?
That's actually a great question, right? So, combined, I have about 2 years in the energy space. I spent most of my life consulting, so I do have a fresh perspective. And one of the things you see when you step in fresh and you look at like the divide between IT and OT is that OT looks an awful lot like IT. And then as you learn more, you realize, well, actually, there's a very specialized set of skills in the transmission and the generation space. So it is, while there are IT technologies at play, the service level or the service quality that you have to provide is a much higher bar than, say, in a .com or any other type of just general IT. And so I respect how you do have to have those specialized skills in OT. However, I think it's where cybersecurity comes in play, where you begin to realize actually the same thing applies for them, right? So if they are that specialized in the OT space, they're not going to be able to specialize as the people do who specialize in cybersecurity. So you really have to start bringing them together. And of course, IT really is the glue that ties it all together. So organizationally, I think we're looking at where are the different skills in the talent pools, and how do we work together, and how do we work to inform each other, and bring those different expertise to play. And it's a give and take constantly of the different requirements for the different business, and also the different perspectives, especially like I said in the security or the availability, which is I think the availability side's where IT provides the most input.
Great.
So it's evolving, right?
Absolutely. And Grant, you've obviously got a long tenure there at Bluebonnet, and the interesting thing about electric cooperatives, I always find it refreshing when you talk to the folks at electric cooperatives. They refer to their customers as members, right?
Right.
Literally, your customers are your owners,
Right.
and it's an interesting dynamic. Not only kind of managing all that IT-OT, but also explaining and informing your members why you're doing certain things, right? Why you're making certain investments. How are you managing that convergence, and how are you also managing the consumer or the member aspect of scrutinizing what you're doing?
So for Bluebonnet, that convergence has kind of been evolving over a period of time, and it became kind of a necessity as the OT, as the operational technologies began to evolve and become more robust. The opportunities for the interaction with the IT or traditional technology group became forced, right? They needed the IT professionals to help begin to manage the data that they were beginning to extract from the system. And so that evolution happened, and then at some point we integrated the whole group from a personnel perspective to where you have all of them working in one group. And for us, that's been really important because the OT folks have a lot of really good quality data that they use for their little world to operate the system, which is their responsibility. But when you begin to converge those two, there's a lot of value you can bring to your members, your consumers, with that data. And how do you extract that data and begin to use it in ways, very non-traditional ways, to communicate with your consumers, to deliver them different data and information than they've ever been able to receive before. And so, in a member-owned space, transparency is kind of key. And so, in order for us to be able to provide the level of transparency to our consumers, bringing some of that data over, being able to communicate during outage situations effectively, bringing more information about what's going on out there and why they're experiencing interruption, all the way to what we call MSRs, but a CSR can communicate over the phone. We give our CSRs a lot of data right up front that they can take, metering data, system data, outage data that they can communicate real time with consumers about. So that evolution has forced us to begin to plan and leverage all the different technologies together to deliver quality information.
Yeah, and it's interesting as well. I know we talked about the adoption of emerging technologies, and it's always kind of a tough decision to know when you should adopt something. I know you mentioned that it's one size doesn't fit all in the world of emerging technologies. You talked about smart meters, for example, and smart grid. You adopted power line carrier technology. Actually, you were one of the early adopters, and now you have to ask yourself, wow, was that a mistake adopting so early? Was it a genius idea? How do you all deal with knowing when to adopt these technologies and even which technology to adopt? Because in your case, RF, for example, didn't make sense when it came to smart meters, because I think you've got a density of, what is it, like 8 meters or 8 members, customers per mile.
Right.
So the technology didn't quite fit. I mean, how do you all keep up with all these disparate technologies, how you make them work, when you adopt, when you should wait? I mean, do you have any thoughts on that?
Absolutely. It's a constant planning process and evaluating the field of technologies available. But really, our road mapping process is about what problem are we trying to solve, what technology is available, and what technology may not yet be available. And working through that process constantly, trying to identify what may or may not work. You can be bleeding edge, cutting edge, or lagging, right? I mean, and there's a whole lot of space in between. But we typically are doing it from a value proposition. Can we justify the value, and is the technology mature enough for us to not take undue risk for our membership? And so we constantly evaluate that and try to identify where those opportunities exist. For us, almost 15 years ago, evaluating power line carrier meters and delivering that data back through technology, that was early technology. We were looking at that, and it was a huge cost savings. You took a bunch of meter readers out of the field. Now for us to look at RF technology and some of the additional benefits of it, that cost benefit, we've absorbed the largest component of it. So it has us being very innovative and working with our partners to figure out how do we leverage that system to the extent that we can to garner through some creative ways, getting the same capabilities without having to change out your entire meter set.
Great. Yeah, talking about all these different evolving technologies and when to implement, when not to implement. I know I listened to Ganesh Bell on Tuesday from GE talk about the IT-OT convergence and the Internet of Things and machine learning and so on. There was a number that stuck in my mind when he presented. He said by 2020, which is literally 2.5 years from now, there's going to be 7 billion, with a B, 7 billion connected devices that are going to be managed by somebody, somehow. And these are all devices talking to each other. And it struck me that just the sheer volume of data is just, it's mind-boggling, right? I mean, we've talked about it for the last few years, but we're now at a point where it just almost seems impossible to manage that much data. And it's not just machine learning, it's not just the Internet of Things and devices talking to each other, but even in areas like financial transformation, there's this big data convergence, the smart grid with all the different smart meters in the field and devices on the grid that are talking to each other and mitigating issues. I mean, Gary, you have been recognized in all the things that you've done at Centerpoint as kind of being a leader in the area of managing big data. And again, it's not just about the smart meters. It's various places throughout the organization that you're having to deal with big data. I mean, how do you see that impacting your business, and how have you managed to kind of keep ahead of the curve?
Well, and I'll tie back a little bit to what Grant was saying earlier. And the conference has talked a lot about design and forward thinking. And if we're going to plan a community, a facility, there's always a master plan, right? You've got a piece of property, you understand that, you're building that out. We may not know how all of the property looks, but I think one of the things is whether it relates to data or the decisions we're making is technology is more in tune to strategy today. Is that it can't be an afterthought, it has to be a forethought. And then the people that are designing the technologies have to take in considerations the decisions that they're making today that make small course corrections that make significant foundational efforts towards the future. So I think that's the big difference. It's not just like, well, where do you want that server and what do you want it to do? This is more about where will it go as you have that conversation, and data's the same way. If you look at some of the numbers, the CAGR on data growth on global basis from now to 2030 is somewhere around 43%. I'd like my money to do that. I haven't been that fortunate. I went back and looked and said, well, you know, we're a utility. We shouldn't be on that same growth pattern, but yet we're seeing large data growth. In our period of time, we were at 39%. So it just comes to the fact that we can't defeat the physics of what's happening in the data world. So now we have to learn how to manage it and embrace it. And that goes to the value you get from it. And at the end of the day, it's like the old Star Trek show with the trouble with tribbles. They're everywhere. They multiply. You know, and you've got to figure out how to manage this and get the value of those critical nuggets that are within there and put away those ones that may not have immediate but may have subsequent value. So approaches to cloud, approaches to really changing the workforce and how they can look at thinking about data, all of those come into play as we look down the road of what's going to happen for all those 7 billion devices.
Yeah, and it's amazing. I know you talked about it at dinner last night. It's not just the devices talking to each other, but you also have to kind of retrain or rethink your organization, right? Because it's becoming more of a self-service environment, right? Where before, in the good old days, somebody would want a report, they would come to IT and ask you to build a report. Things are different now, right? I mean, you've got employees that are basically creating their own data stores and their own. So how do you deal with that? I mean,
well, it has to be that collaboration to understand, but also I think we're the folks that help guide them down that path. You know, we have to create the partnerships, not only with our vendors, but with our business partners. You know, I looked at a graphic one time and it talked about how many people do you need to solve a data problem, and it's a circle, and the more complex you go around the circle, the more people you need. From a person that does the data mining to somebody that's actually a subject matter expert to a data scientist. The more you went around, it took maybe 4 to 5 people to solve that problem. And I think our mentality is that we have one person, unfortunately, often on Excel trying to get an answer, right? So those things are going to be past us in the future, and we're going to have collaborative teams to think creatively and think through the solution sets for the data and hypothesis and not just the reporting.
Absolutely. And you know, Colt, I think you're in a unique business, right? A lot of us, and going back to my background, we had the luxury of not really having to be held that accountable to our customers. Of course, we wanted high customer satisfaction ratings, but in your business, customers aren't happy, they're leaving, right? And so how do you deal with, how do you manage and leverage big data as perhaps a competitive differentiator in your business?
Yeah, we heard over the past couple of days how competitive the ERCOT retail market is. There's dozens of registered retailers out there that really on a weekly, daily basis are looking to target our customers to switch them away. Not only active retailers, but then there's brokers, right? So you've got this extremely competitive market. We then have, of our 1.7 million customers that we do have, we've got a good portion of those that throughout the year are, they're going to term on their current contract, right? So then there's some portion of the 1.7 that are going to have to make an active decision: do I stay with TXU or do I leave? So given all of that, absolutely, kind of the marketing to the acquisition, the service, the retention of the customers, it's paramount for TXU. And to be able to do that, I mean, data is going to continue to play a critical role. One of the things that I love about this type of discussion, though, is it's not a discussion about servers. It's not a discussion about data centers, right? It's not even a discussion about the business applications that I manage. We're starting to have the discussion about the data, right? And it's really pronounced with this influx of all of the 7 billion devices, this influx of all the data. We really have to be focused and thoughtful about how we architect the data, how we centralize it, how we develop the advanced analytics, the servers, the storage, the applications that utilize that. That's kind of downstream from the data, right? We have to have, kind of as Gary described it, kind of a master plan of how we're going to use that data. When we think about servicing our TXU Energy customers, it's across all of the channels, right? It's the call center, it's the automated IVR phone system, it's your website, it's your mobile app. Now starting to be on social media. So how do you leverage the data? How do you provide consistent, repeatable experiences that are seamless and transparent really across those channels. So right in the example where a customer requests some kind of service or transaction through the IVR system, they hang up, they're immediately on txu.com, and they're seeing the status there, right? And it seems simple, but we all know that there's a lot of work behind the scenes, but it's all enabled and supported by us being able to really manage that data.
Yeah, it's phenomenal. And the other thing that reminds me when you said that, how do you keep people from getting a different answer depending on what channel they go to? I mean, that's another challenge you have, right, serving such a diverse customer base.
Exactly. Even the one example that we talk about a lot, and it seems so simple, but yet it's something that we have to continue to work on and address is direct mailing, right? Actual physical letters, marketing mails that we're sending out to customers, offering them for products and services either to extend or to enroll into. The customer receives it, they call in, and there's a bit of a disconnect, right? Because there's either delays or there's incorrect information or inconsistent data between what was on that letter and then what the customer service representative is seeing, right? So again, to be able to make all of that data consistent so that it's a pleasurable and it's an easy experience for the customer, that's really objective number one for us.
Yeah, and Grant, I got to imagine with the you've got 100,000 members, so maybe you don't have quite the millions of customers that other utilities have, but you're still dealing with same sorts of issues, right? And I mean, Absolutely. Is that, do you have any other perspectives around how to best manage that data, how to best serve your constituents? And
yeah, I think it takes a fair amount of discipline, obviously, as to who's responsible for the data, where's it coming from, where's it going to get used, and then ultimately, what is your retention? I mean, I think that's the biggest thing is it short-term data decisions where you need the data to make a very quick decision and then the data doesn't need to exist going forward? Is it data that'll bring you value over time? So a lot of that's very difficult to determine and figure out. Is it kind of static data or is it dynamic data? And how else could you use that same data? And so it takes a lot of planning, decision making. And what I like about what I've heard today is that it's really not IT's responsibility. We help plan and manage and bring the data together, but ultimately the business folks and the consumers are the users of the data. They're the ones that are going to ultimately make decisions based on it and consume it to their, hopefully, advantage. And so there's a lot of decision making and management of that to be successful, so that you're not duplicating data and you're not being wasteful with the amount of resources that you're using. All of us operate on tight budgets trying to make sure that we can deliver the most value at the least amount of cost. And so if you're duplicating a lot of data for different purposes, that's an inefficient way of providing value to the organization.
Absolutely. Yeah, and Brian, I know, again, your fresh perspective to the industry. I don't know if we're the most data-intensive industry, but certainly our energy and utilities industry is very, very asset and data-intensive. I mean, what have been your observations in the
well, actually, that's absolutely correct. And you have to have a lot of data, and you have to have sub-second communication in a way that most industries really don't have to worry about. I think the interesting thing for me is if you look at everything that's been said this week, where do we think innovation is going to come from? What's going to change this industry over the next 10, 20 years? And how do we view IT or technology, right? We view it as a cost. But the reality is that's where the change is going to come from. That's where we need to be investing, right? So, and to your ship analogy, we know the ship's moving, right? There's a couple of them. We don't know how fast, but we need to start paddling, and we need to start thinking about technology in a way that's different, because it's no longer the plumbing. It's no longer just, running the spigot and being able to get water out of it, and we don't think about it. It's actually it has become a strategic asset, and we have to think about how we invest in that going forward.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know last night you talked a lot about the cloud, right? Everybody talks about the cloud. There's even memes and comedies, and any stand-up act you go see, people are making jokes about the cloud. But talking about all this fast-moving technology. It's moving so rapidly. How do you keep up? You implement a new system and already it's outdated. You get a new iPhone, oh, it's no good anymore. So how do you see cloud playing a role? How could we not have a panel without talking about the cloud?
Right.
What are your thoughts on?
Well, it's actually interesting, right? And I think, to me, part of it harkens back to the earlier conversation about OT versus IT, right? So let's take the OT out of the conversation for the moment. But from the IT perspective, there's a couple of interesting trends. One, and this is true, I believe, in energy, but it's broader than that. It's across industries. The IT spend is really happening there, and the IT spend is happening outside of IT, right? So people are going out and getting their services, they're getting their Slack, or they're getting whatever the tool it is that they want to use. And especially when you have industries where there's a lot more turnover, you see a lot of that. 'Cause people come in, they use the tools that they used in the last place. That quick adoption and that, the immediacy of being able to get new services, that's something that we have to embrace, and we have to get on a footing that says, okay, no, that's not the old environment where we had a lot of control, right? But we can still have all the controls that we need, and we need to think about how we get those in place so that we can help our customers, or our business users, get those services and get them quickly, and still make sure we maintain the proper security and confidentiality that we need to worry about. So for me, it's something that if you look 3 years out, that's where a lot of business services are going to be coming from. It's not going to be that build me a server farm for the ERP solution or whatever. It's going to be, I want to go ahead and I've already started signing people up. We're using this ERP solution. And so we need to be, from an IT perspective, have the posture of being able to manage that and secure that correctly.
Yeah, and it's interesting, Gary, I know last night we talked all the years you've been managing technology and really trying to stay ahead of the curve. In our industry, in the utility industry, I think maybe 10 years ago or whatever the number was when cloud started to emerge as kind of a cool, interesting technology, but there was always this, pushback from utilities. Well, we could never think of putting any of our customer information in the cloud or any other information. It has to be secure. But Gary, you talked about last night how you're actually kind of building almost like a hybrid environment of, hey, we'll use cloud where it makes sense. And then you've also got the dynamic of being an investor-owned utility and trying to earn a return on an asset, the dynamic of the accounting and the regulatory aspects. I mean, how are you managing the whole cloud question at Centerpoint?
Well, I think a few things as you look to the future and how do you actually address business problems, and particularly where business services are more commoditized, very similar across many industries. Cloud makes perfect sense. Where we've gone more hybrid is because of the Houston footprint and the hurricanes, is the reliability of ensuring connectivity during the periods of time when our customers have to reach call centers and we have to reach our crews to get services restored. So we'll probably see hybrid models evolve. We implemented our cloud secure broker as of the end of last year, and for better terms, that's the adapter that hooks the trailer to the back of the car. It lets you actually connect to the cloud in a secure way, encrypt the information, and exchange data between your enterprise and cloud solutions. As far as the accounting, that's still evolving out. NARUC passed a resolution asking each one of the NARUC participants to start thinking about models in which we can incorporate cloud as part of that solution. And it also plays in your regulatory environment. Depending on your recovery periods, cloud could potentially be a better solution than a capitalized solution for an OpEx cost. So it's going to be a case-by-case evaluation that each one of us will be going through.
Interesting. So it's very much an art, not so much a science. It's not a question of all cloud or no cloud. There's a lot of dynamics to it. And in Kolt, of course, the accounting still is a bit of an issue for you, but not quite as much, right? Because you're in a little bit of a different business model. Again, it kind of comes back to the majority of your business is about being competitive and about winning business. And so how are you leveraging the cloud, and how do you see that evolving?
Yeah, so being a competitive, but we're a public company, so we still account OpEx, CapEx, just like any other company does. Of course, we don't get the return of and the return on the capital, but for us, it's a total cost view. And if you would have asked me 2 years ago or 2.5 years ago, we were having a lot of debate, a lot of discussion internally with our leadership team around the value and what is the value going to the cloud? Why are we doing it? At that time, we understood and recognized the flexibility, probably speed to market to deliver for the business, additional kind of business-driven technology changes, but we weren't really confident on the cost. Seeing some other companies do it and talking with kind of research R&D companies, the whole cost question was we weren't really sure. I think even in the past 2 years, we've advanced pretty far. I mean, we right now are actively going through a program to look to push a large majority of all of our applications and our data up to the cloud. Over the past even 5 years, and most companies probably are like this. Most everybody, or probably everybody's using the cloud in one way or the other. If it's using Box or Dropbox for document collaboration, we just migrated to Workday, a SaaS solution. We're completing our movement to Office 365, putting all email and a majority of SharePoint in the cloud. So most companies are like that, but when you start talking about, are you going to take your data center and move your data center to the cloud? That's the big question, right? So for us, with our roughly 250 applications, business-facing applications, we're looking to see what portion of those can we move to the cloud? Because the reality is there's companies out there, the Microsofts, the Amazons, others, that their core competency, they are much, much better at data center management than we are, right? It's none of our core competencies. They can do it better, they can do it faster, they can do it more cost effective, right? And it just frees up the time and the resources and the cost for us to focus really more on the more innovative, business-driven kind of value projects.
Absolutely.
I think there's a place where, one of the biggest challenges that I see coming for all of us is that when you start having this data generated, so we just heard a little while ago that, Nest and CPS in their program, there are going to be devices that at some point inside the home we're going to want to garner information and data from. Already doing it in some respects, but that's going to proliferate quite a bit. And so the real question is this data that exists in the cloud that might not be ours, but we may want to converge with our data, how is that going to evolve over time? And how do we then begin to integrate that with what is traditional kind of customer information system data and taking all that information from alternate sources, which could be a wide varying range of data sources. So it's Nest today, it may be information from cars with batteries or battery solutions, and I think we had a great conversation last night about that's going to impact how we manage the grid going forward. There's going to be too many different things that we have to manage in order to do that effectively and maintain the reliability that our consumers expect. So.
Awesome. Well, hey, we're getting the red flashing light up here on the screen, so I think we're out of time, but I'll defer to the Zpryme folks if we should open it up for a quick question or should we just move on? I think I'm getting the move on. That either means it's traveling and it's a turnover or we should move on. So thank you again and appreciate it.